Here's a strange question. If artificial intelligence is becoming another filmmaking tool, why are filmmakers sometimes so reluctant to admit they're using it? Because something interesting just happened with director Eli Roth. And I don't think the most important part of the story is whether a few shots in a horror movie were created with artificial intelligence. I think the interesting part is what happened when people started asking about them. Because this may tell us something about where Hollywood really stands on AI. Not publicly, privately. Eli Roth has a new horror movie called Ice Cream Man. Roth directed it, produced it, co-wrote it, and appears in the film. But before the movie even reached theaters, people started noticing something. Some of the imagery looked like it might have been generated with AI. One sequence in particular attracted attention. It was an old-fashioned animated sequence designed to evoke cartoons from the late 1920s. When Roth was originally asked about the animation, his explanation sounded remarkably traditional. He talked about his animation background. He said he drew the loop cycles and styles himself. He described working with animators to make the movement more fluid, and working with an artist to create that old-fashioned, jittery appearance. He even talked about sitting there, drawing the frames he wanted. That's a pretty specific description of the creative process, which is why what happened next mattered. Questions about AI continued, and Roth issued a clarification. His words were, "I misspoke." He acknowledged that AI had been used in a very small portion of several scenes, and described it as technology and creativity coming together to help realize his vision. Now, I'm deliberately not going to say Eli Roth lied, because I don't know that. None of us knows what was in his head when he gave that first answer. Maybe he personally drew those elements, and AI was used later in the pipeline. Maybe different artists handled different portions of the sequence. Maybe his original answer was incomplete. Maybe he genuinely misspoke. But that's actually what makes this story interesting. Because the question isn't, did Eli Roth use AI? We know AI was used. The better question is, why wasn't that simply part of the original explanation? Now compare that reaction with almost every other filmmaking tool. If somebody asked a filmmaker whether Photoshop was used on a movie, would anybody care? What about After Effects, digital compositing, CGI, motion capture, digital intermediate? Nobody expects a director to provide an inventory of every piece of software involved in every shot. But AI is different. Right now, saying we used AI doesn't simply describe a production technique. For some people, it makes a statement about the production itself. Were artists replaced? Was copyrighted material used for training? Did somebody lose a job? Was the filmmaker cutting corners? Is the work somehow less legitimate? Those are very different questions, and some of them are absolutely worth asking. But we've created an environment where the three words, "made with AI," can become a judgment before anyone even examines how the AI was actually used. And filmmakers know that, which creates a very strange incentive. Instead of encouraging transparency about AI, we may actually be encouraging people to hide it. And that's where I think this story becomes much bigger than Eli Roth. Because Hollywood may be entering a period where AI is simultaneously becoming more common behind the scenes and less comfortable to talk about publicly. But there's another complication. Using AI can describe very different kinds of creative work. A filmmaker generating an entire sequence from a text prompt isn't necessarily equivalent to an animator drawing original artwork and using an AI tool somewhere later in the process. An AI-generated background isn't necessarily equivalent to replacing an actor. Using machine learning to clean an image isn't necessarily equivalent to generating a performance. These technologies are becoming embedded at different levels of production. So simply asking, "Did you use AI?" may eventually become almost meaningless. The better questions are, where was AI used? What did it do? Who created the underlying material? Did it replace work someone otherwise would have performed? Was the source material properly licensed? And perhaps most importantly, Who made the creative decisions? That's a much more sophisticated conversation than AI equals bad or AI equals good. And this is where I think filmmakers have a responsibility too. If you're going to use generative AI, own it. Explain it. Tell us what you did. Whatever role AI played, describe it clearly enough that audiences can judge the use rather than the label. Because trying to minimize AI use may actually make audiences more suspicious. And that's especially true right now. We're at a moment when people genuinely want to understand what's happening to creative work. Actors are concerned about digital replicas. Writers are concerned about training. Animators and visual effects artists are wondering what portions of their jobs might change. Those aren't irrational concerns. So transparency matters, but transparency has to work both ways. Audiences and critics also need enough nuance to recognize that admitting AI was used doesn't automatically tell us whether something unethical happened. Otherwise, we're creating an impossible situation. We demand that filmmakers disclose AI, and then attack them simply for disclosing it. If that's the environment we create, we shouldn't be surprised when people become reluctant to talk about it. I've been working with film, video, and graphics since the early 1980s, and I've watched tools change this business repeatedly. Desktop graphics, Photoshop, nonlinear editing, digital compositing, CGI, digital cameras. Every transition created arguments about what was legitimate. But this time, the argument isn't only about whether the tool belongs in filmmaking. It's connected to labor, copyright, authorship, consent, ownership, and even the definition of creativity itself. That's why this transition is so politically complicated. Which brings us to something this debate still doesn't really have. A useful vocabulary. Not AI film. But how was AI used in this film? That's a much more useful question. Maybe Eli Roth simply misspoke. Maybe the AI contribution really was tiny. Maybe the controversy surrounding Ice Cream Man will disappear in a week. But I think the larger issue is going to stay with us, because AI tools aren't disappearing. They're going to get better. They're going to become integrated into software filmmakers already use. And eventually, it may become surprisingly difficult to make a major film without some form of machine learning somewhere in the pipeline. So Hollywood has a choice. It can treat AI like a dirty little secret, something everybody quietly uses while publicly pretending they don't. Or filmmakers can start being transparent about what these tools actually do, and audiences can start judging that use intelligently. Because maybe the question shouldn't be, did you use AI? Maybe it should be, what did you use it for? And that's a conversation worth having. I'm Mark Kimball. This is The Politics of AI Filmmaking.